Hi everyone, welcome to a small walkthrough of our week 4 notes. In this week, we are finally getting to our GUIs or graphical user interfaces. And the way that we're going to implement them in this course is by using the Tkinter class. Now, the Tkinter class is a standard Python interface, and there's a ton of documentation. In the notes, you'll find a few links there as well. And before we actually go ahead and look at the code of this week, I wanted to show off what we'd actually be looking at inside of these interfaces. So again, in this documentation library, there's a place called TK Docs, and these have extensive tutorials on how to use it. So if you also look at this one, you'll be able to scroll through here and figure out a few examples and so forth as well. And there's also a section here called TK commands, and these are really useful later on if you're ever doing some of the lab work or the homework. It's really useful to come here and figure out which commands are doing what. Now, this might look overwhelming at the start right now, so before we do that, why don't we take a little overview of what it actually is. And then again, this is going to be a graphical toolkit, which allows us to develop graphical applications. Now, I won't be reading all of this out for us. You can take your time to read through it. Most important thing here is that because we are using a built-in Python library, what we're going to be using in our code is this statement that says import tkinter. You can also go ahead and say from tkinter import something, essentially wherever your classes are that you want to use. If you haven't been using different classes before in Python, this might look a bit unfamiliar, but for the time being, you can just reference this as you will. And before we actually take a look at any code, there's a few things that we need to look at. Our main one is this TK. So the past few weeks, we've been looking at creating our own objects. We made a dog class, we made a person class, and a Q class. And what this is it's a TK class or an object, which is a GUI widget that pretty much represents a window. So this object is going to kind of be this guy at the very top that holds in all the other things. And what are the other things that it could hold? Well, it can hold in a label. And essentially, a label is going to be able to show us a piece of text or an image inside of a window. And then we also have another method called pack. And what pack does is you can kind of think of it as like if you're packing in presents or packing in objects together. What this does is it goes ahead and puts widgets. And again, widgets is this terminology that references labels and other aspects of TK. And it's going to pack widgets into each other. And there's this cool one here called the photo image. And again, this is a GUI application and you can make it as intensive as you'd like. But the photo image is going to be able to use GIFs to go ahead and create it into an object that can be used by Tkinter. So we have a few examples inside of our code. And again, these are all different windows. So this is kind of like the top level window. These guys are all parts that can be added into this TK object up here. But not only are we going to be creating windows, we also want to go ahead and try to look at how our program is going to respond to events. And the way that we get this response is by using this event loop. So again, there's a bit of pseudocode here. And this event loop, this first one, is going to go ahead and say, while the main window has not been closed, if an event has occurred, run the associated event handler function. And this is going to keep going, of course, while this main window has not been closed. And this main window essentially is this square that we can X out of. And if we don't X out of it, it's going to keep going. And again, there's a few event handlers that we can look at. Most basic one will be a button, essentially. Maybe we'll have a button that goes ahead and when we type or we click on something, it's going to increase the value of something. We also have an entry widget that goes ahead and creates a text box. And then we also have a text widget. So again, this documentation is all there for you. Please make sure you read through them. If you are stuck with anything, it's very extensive. Take your time to read through them as well. Again, there's so much out there on these guys that it's kind of hard to put them all into a single lecture note. So just make sure to take your time to scroll through them. And you can see even here that we have an example Hello World program as well. All right, everyone. So I had a small file here called test.py, and what I want to do here is try to go ahead and set up my first window to run in my GUI. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is import tkinter, and what I'm also going to try to do here is a way that we might have seen this before. There's two different ways you can import stuff in Python. You can simply say import Tkinter like so, or we could say something like from Tkinter. And again, we already looked at a few of these items already, such as TK, a TK object, which is a GUI widget, and a label. And so what I'm going to say in my code here is from this class of Tkinter, import label and TK. Now, if I want to go ahead and create this main window, and where am I getting this terminology of main window again? Well, again, during our pseudocode here, we have a main loop, essentially, which will be running for us. The way that we can do this is create a variable called root and set it equal to TK. Now, if I go ahead and run my code, you'll see now I already have this guy pop up on my screen, and you can see I have a TK up here. Something's happening as well. Nothing too interesting yet, but I have technically created my first GUI. Now, before we go ahead and do this, some of us might import it like this too. Import Tkinter. Sure. That's right. And if I go ahead and run this, you'll notice here that I get this issue that says the name TK is not defined after I put it there. So what you would have to do in this scenario is if I want to get it to look like this, I would have to do something where I say tkinter.tk. And now you'll notice that it's working just the same way. But again, what is this Tkinter? Well, Tkinter is an object and very similar to our previous objects. After we go ahead and we press a dot and tab, we have access to all these associated values or methods with it, values or functions. So again, which one would you prefer to use? Honestly, both are okay, but for simplicity's sake and on your end, to make it easier to read the code, I would just recommend doing it this way, where you say from Tkinter, import your label and TK. And again, this TK is going to be referencing this method right here. So now, how do I go ahead and actually make this a bit more interesting for us, besides just a blank, besides just a blank GUI window? Well, what we could do is create another variable. Maybe we'll call it widget. And I could set it equal to a label. And again, where am I getting label? Label is built into the Tkinter library. And this label is going to take in a few parameters for us. Now, these are parameters that, again, in the documentation, show us a bit about it. And you'll see here in the notes as well, we have one that says widget is equal to label, and we need to provide it a master and then a piece of text. And again, the reason we have to provide it a master and set it equal to root is because this root is going to be the main loop that keeps running for us. So again, if we go ahead and we assign a master is equal to root, and where am I getting this word root from? It's just from up here. I could call this t, and this would need to be equal to t then as well. I'm going to call it root for the time being to make sure it looks like the notes. And I can go ahead and say hello world and my text in my second definition there. So again, this is going to be a widget that is created with the label. Now, if we try to think back, what was the other thing that we needed to remember? We also had this idea inside of our, inside of creating our first GUIs is packing. So what this pack method does is it goes ahead and it packs widgets inside of other widgets. So I need to go ahead and pack this widget into this one here. And the way that I can do that is by typing out the widget name. This is called the widget right here. And again, these names, I don't want anyone to get confused with thinking this is the only way you can call them. These are just simple variable names that you can choose to be whatever you'd like. And after we say that, we're going to say pack, like so. And now I'm going to go ahead and try to run this code. We'll notice here that I also get the hello world running for us too. So it looks pretty good. We're getting a piece of text coming out, but there might be one more thing that we're missing here. And even though this looks like it's running okay on us, an issue that we have is that we didn't use this root.main loop, but we were thinking, okay, well, it still worked for us. The reason that it's still working for us without adding in that last piece of code that says root.main loop is because there's no events or anything that we need to loop to keep checking to see if it needs to run. And what would the events be again? Things like buttons, entry values, and so forth. For the time being, I want to show off how to actually root, or excuse me, how to do the main loop. So what you would say is you would go ahead and access the root, and then you would say dot main loop. And if you run this code, you'll see nothing really changed, but we actually went ahead and created our first GUI. So for the time being, let's try to go ahead and let's see what happens if this occurs. Let's just experiment a little bit more here. We'll see that Hello World 2 gets replaced for this guy because we packed them. So I want to go ahead and add in my widget 2. And if I go ahead and run it now, we'll see that I'm not getting Hello World 2. So what I would need to do is for every widget that I created in my GUI, I'm going to need to pack it into my main or my overall loop that I need to work with. And now we can see that I have my Hello World 1 and my Hello World 2 showing. So please go ahead and fiddle around a bit with these, try to add in some more labels, and so far you've created your first GUI program.